Welcome back, everyone. I'm Sejal Thacker, and I'm your host for this exclusive Nobody Studios live stream with our chief Nobody, Mark McNally. Welcome back, Mark.
Hi, Sejal.
Hey there. Can you believe it? It's our last live stream. It's the grand finale for this year,
Of the
2020.
year. Yeah, come on now.
Of the year, just of the year. I don't know where the time goes. I was actually, before we jumped on today, I was reading your newsletter that you just sent out. And it reminded me, it's kind of poetic in a way, if you think about it, that we're literally on the year mark of when we started our equity, when we launched our equity crowdfunding campaign last December. And so I wanted to just start off by giving a shout out to all of our 1,000 equity crowdfunders all around. We've got 55 countries. Wanted to give a shout out to all of you. I mean, we were able to raise close to $1 million, right? So thank you for your support. And obviously we also we're very grateful that you're part of our crowd infused mentality now. You're going to be part of us as we grow and do some exciting stuff in 2024. So Mark, that was just an awesome realization. It's been a year.
Yeah, I was doing that myself recently. I mean, sometimes I think when you're on journeys like this, or in life in general, but startups is usually my frame of reference. Like, you have big goals you're trying to accomplish. They take time to actually come to fruition, and sometimes you can feel like you're on a treadmill. You're not moving forward, or you're making small incremental steps. And I don't feel that way in terms of, I definitely appreciate the momentum we make, but I have big goals. And sometimes I can get frustrated that we're not, where I want to be in this category, or not where I want to be in this category. Like, that's just my nature, right? But it's more internal. I try not to verbalize that too much, but it's more like I know where I want to go.
Mm-hmm.
But it really helps to stop and just take stock of like where you were a year ago, or the things you were dealing with 2 years ago. And that's why I think the end of the year is like valuable for that, right? And I just think I encourage people, like, everybody's heard me, I've been working this whole week. I'm like, this is like the last working week. I'm actually working next week as well, but gonna be traveling with the family. But next week for me is like a strategic moment where I'm really just trying to spend my time unpacking the year, the things we didn't yet quite get done, but really focusing on the goals for next year so we can start the year with some clarity. And yeah, just what you just did is exactly what I'm doing. Is like, it really helps to stop and appreciate how far you have come, the things you've navigated, the things you resolved, the progress you've made, the growth. Like, I don't know. For me, I think it puts it in perspective, and it gives you an appreciation that you have to measure this a little bit. You got to zoom out to like the 40,000 foot level and really measure it in terms of, I've said this from the beginning. This is the last thing I'm doing in my career. And I tell people, like, I'll be doing this, God willing, 5 years, 25 years from now, if I have that chance. This is the last thing I'm putting my energy into. And so with that kind of goal in mind, it gives you perspective. Like, it's okay if it took 4 years instead of 3, or it took 2 years instead of 1, or like, you're building something for the long term. And I think you've heard me say that from the very beginning, which is like, what we're doing is gnarly, but it's just, the hardest days are already behind us. It's going to get a little bit easier every day, momentum and people and lessons and learnings. And I think that only comes out when you stop to actually reflect on the progress you've made.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important to celebrate those small moments and victories along the way. And so we started kind of doing that last episode. And so I want to pick up where we left off. And so last time you shared insights on several key topics, right? And so for anybody that missed our prior episodes, we have them all on our Nobody Studios YouTube channel. But last week, Mark shared, and we talked about sort of the importance of company culture and how it can either build a company up or break it down, right? And Mark talked about sort of the intricacies of board dynamics and why it's important to be very careful about where who you're adding to the board, and making sure you maintain the culture of the board as well. And then we had the privilege of hearing a couple of different situations where Mark has really kind of leaned heavily in on our core values when making tough decisions. And so I was kind of watching the last session, and I want to pick up and kind of go back to something you were saying towards the end, Mark, because you said something really quickly, and I want to make sure we don't lose that lesson because it's important. And we started talking about busy work. And we know that this could be a common pitfall for startups, right? And so you said something really quickly in there. You said the main thing is the main thing. And so I want to pick up there. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that and share that lesson again? Because I think it's really important.
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways, a startup is almost like the way you might think of your life when you're like 15 years old, right? You think you have all these possibilities and all these potentials and all these things you want to do. And you might have the beginning of your bucket list, although you don't probably call it your bucket list at 15, but you have these things that you want to do in your life. And it's like, I think that startups are full of potential and full of possibilities. And it's what makes them incredibly exciting. And I am the number one violator, and I'm completely guilty of like, I love thinking through all the spinoffs and possibilities. And, if we do this right, we can do that. But I think that that first statement is the most important. If we do this right, then we can do that. And I don't think that, my experience with working a lot of startup teams throughout the years is that sometimes we're not good at that. And so some people, worked with me for a while, they'll hear me say a lot like, figure out the feature in the product that pays for the other features. Because I can love to rat hole on all the possible things we can build in the future, but what is the one thing that everybody's going to use you for and love you for? Or as a business model, I get all the spinoffs, I get all the ancillary stuff, and we can fantasize about what the movie looks like in 20 years. But what is the business model that pays for the rest, right? And I think that boils down into, this whole idea of like understanding what is the most important thing to accomplish and make sure that 80%, 85% of your focus is going towards that. When you wake up in the morning, that's what you're driving towards. And your key metrics that tell you if you're succeeding on that are in front of you. You got a post-it note on the white, on your computer, and you're looking at the numbers. And it seems so kind of basic, but I really have seen just amazing teams and amazing people join a call for an hour and talk about a whole bunch of stuff that if I apply my brutal experience to it, I'm like, none of what you guys talked about matters. And sometimes I'll say that to make people stop and think like, that was all really fun and that was a good conversation, but none of it had to do with the main thing. Like the main thing is accomplishing X or whatever, right? And I always say like, I don't know, we're going to go do a picnic on the beach, Sejal, and we have all these things we're thinking about. But what is the main thing? The main thing is, do we know what beach we're going to? And what else? Do we have food? Okay, sandwiches. Do we need chairs? I don't know. Maybe that's not a main thing, but it'd be nice to have. Like putting things in a stack ranked order that says, if we forget the chairs, we forget the blanket, we forget everything, but we are heading towards the beach and we decide to stop at Subway on the way and grab sandwiches. You're still on the beach and you had a picnic on the beach. That was the main thing. Now you could get really excited about, well, we're going to have this candle and we're going to have this little table and we're going to, all that stuff's really cool. And it might be part of the journey or it might not. But the main thing was you wanted to be on the beach having a picnic, right? So boiling that down into a startup and saying, okay, what is the main thing? Because if you can get there as a team, you can help keep each other accountable when you're rat holing, or I call it wandering. When you're wandering in all these, what could be's, it's like, great. We all love that idea. But the first thing is we're going to show up and have a, Subway sandwich on the beach. And then, 3 months from now, we might do it with a table. And 3 months from now, we might have, chairs and blankets. Let's just go ahead and keep going down that path. But the main thing is let's have a picnic on the beach. And interpreting that to the startup journey, I think is super important because I really have seen this my entire career. And I see it in the studio, even though we focus on this a lot. I see it in the studio, the ability for people to just wander about what could be versus what is the main thing. And if you keep the main thing, then, that should be, that builds the momentum for everything else, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I'm guilty of that myself. It's hard to sometimes, especially when you're dealing with such like innovative ideas and you're working with people that got such diversity of thought. It's sometimes hard to stay focused on the main objectives or the main thing, especially where, resources are limited or things are moving quickly, right? It's easy to get sidetracked, right? Into these meetings and these conversations. And that it just kind of gives that sort of false sense of productivity, right? But it doesn't really move us forward to where we want to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And people hear me say sometimes, like, you see that brainstorming roll, and people are like, well, that was a really good session, so let's do another session on this next time.
Right.
I'm like, no, whoa. Like, there's 5 minutes left in this meeting. Let's go ahead and decide the main thing we're going to focus on right now. And if we need to do another session in the future, we can schedule it. But don't just fall into this trap of like scheduling the next meeting to pick up where you left off. It's like, no, force yourself to be decisive, force yourself to focus on what needs to be done the next 2 months or 2 weeks or 2 days and get that done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great segue into this next topic that you and I had kind of talked about real briefly in our prep. It's important for people, especially like founders that are starting new companies, to realize that distinction between building that business and then doing like a research project, right? And so we started talking about that a little bit. So talk to us about, this is important for all founders to understand, is where are we going to put our resources, where are we going to put our time, and making that distinction between the two.
Yeah. And again, I think we've occasionally gotten this wrong too in the studio, although we strive to get it right, which is like, at the end of the day, you're building a company, and all the dreams and fantasies we have about what it could become don't mean anything if it's not viable. And so it becomes viable because you find customers that have pain points that you solve for, and it's worth something to them. And, I think, I care a lot about making the world a better place. And, it's easy for me to wrap myself around that kind of language, but we can't be afraid to say we build businesses, and businesses are people, they're companies that make money, that pay for themselves. And they provide value to customers that customers are willing to pay for. And if you get that right, investors will support you, and you can have a self-sustaining business model. So, yeah, I think that research projects don't have that same obligation. If you're sponsored by the government or in academia or whatever, like, it's fun to play with what could be. And we have definitely tried to foster that kind of attitude here and that kind of personality here. But we have to remind people and make it like literally the North Star is, at the end of the day, we're building a company. Mm-hmm. So how are we going to know we succeeded? We're going to have customers that like us and pay for us. And, you have to almost, I think, over stress that to make sure you weed out folks that might be really comfortable in a research mode. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean they're wrong, and they certainly have a place in the world that is amazing and solves the world's problems. But for what we do for a living, we still have to remind ourselves that we build businesses and they have to be viable.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. It's a distinction in the goal, right? The goal of building a business is different versus the goal of doing a research project. And again, is it going to be something that's sustainable and scalable? That's what we're trying to look at, right? Not just gain knowledge out of the research being done. And I think that's really important, and goes to this question that John's asking here, to make that distinction, because it's easy, especially for a studio like ours, that we operate on the progressive model, right? So we have to be very careful where we are allocating our resources, whether we're putting it towards building a business or a research project. We have to be very serious and take that into consideration, because we're operating on limited budgets. So John's asking this question, I think cash flow is the main thing. How do we make money consistently? And I think there was some lessons you wanted to talk about on the finance front anyway. So we could just lead off with this question right here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's exactly what I mean by the main thing, right? So, we'll probably unpack this in the next year with some future sessions around how we're looking at the Idea Lab. And the Idea Lab is kind of where we play and research, but it's not a place that's got a unlimited budget to tinker with cool concepts for the next 10 years. It's actually driven towards building experiments that says, if we did this, would you be willing to pay for it? So it's still about validating the business potential of our ideas, right? And so that's been a strong pivot in the last 6 months, is distinguishing between cool ideas and cool businesses based on the signal you get from the market, and being ready, willing, and able to lean into that dialogue and those questions, and make sure that what you're building is validated by folks that said, hey, this is really cool, I'd pay for it, right? And being comfortable with that, basically being comfortable with the idea that it's okay. We're building businesses to make money, and that's what makes the world go round. And We can do both things at the same time. We can build good businesses and make the world a better place, but they have to be businesses, right? So yeah, I think it's a great point. I mean, that's exactly how we're thinking about it internally.
Yeah, and I think you started talking about this last time when we were talking about that recent situation. But I think some of the questions I've gotten since the last episode, a couple of people reached out to me and they said, securing funding, that's a critical part of growth and scaling. And so, are there any lessons you could share with people about how they, things they should be careful about? And because I think when you were talking about the board, that kind of raised some questions for people about, well, how do we evaluate where we should take our money from. So I don't know if you've got any lessons you want to share on that, because a couple of people did reach out to me on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it comes from a 27-year career of instincts and lessons, right? And I've come to appreciate that while we all need capital, the right capital is more important, than any, above all. So I'd rather have less capital from the right people than plenty of capital from the wrong people. And it's super important because people don't, I think, appreciate that, how that translates into how you make decisions or how you manage a board or, how you do future financing or how you react to acquisition offers. Like all these things translate, right? So I think that's super important. I think the financing thing, I always tell people that I think people see headlines. This company raised $20 million. They're 1 day old. It's on a rocket ship. And I think they hold themselves to that standard. And I would say a few things to that. 99% of startups don't have that happen. Like some dream scenario where the money just falls in on day one. And more often than not, when you read that headline, it's not even that story, right? It's usually on the back end. Founders have been working for years to build something. It just looks like a big moment, right? And it is a big moment, but it's just not as easy. It's always like that 10-year overnight success, right? I really believe that's usually the story when you look behind the curtains. I certainly hope to be celebrating our own announcement in Q1 about a fairly large fundraising. We've been at this 4 years, and we've been at this really hard, and we've gotten there, fighting, every step of the way to make sure that we could get to the next step. And, we've had a lot of great supporters along the way, and it's added up one small investment at a time. So when we announced that we do a big funding, that'll be an exciting day. But there's no way we got there without knowing how to be an evangelist and tell our story and get people behind us. And there's a pecking order to when you're ready for larger capital. And it's usually that you knew how to tell your story and execute against that story. And it's usually supported by smaller capital and friends and family and insiders along the way. And I actually don't think that there's a shortcut to the big money. I actually think that getting people to buy into what you're doing at the earliest stage is actually what builds the muscle that makes you ready for the bigger money down the road. So, I think that people fantasize that, hey, it's almost like they think it's merit based. I'm a good person. This is a good idea. Where's my money? It's like, no, it's actually it's performance based. Like merit based meaning what did you do to earn it, and how hard have you been building against this vision, and what have you learned along the way, and what proof points have you created that show that you're on the right track. I also always try to mentor startup folks to realize that the startup journey is ugly on the inside. It always looks great on the outside. When you look at the press releases and you look at hey, they started this happened, they raised this money, and then they got sold or they went public. It's like, it looks fantastic on the outside. But if you aren't ready for the inside story, which is all the twists and turns and problem solving and personnel stuff and investor stuff, if you're not up for that, you shouldn't be in this business. I thrive in that. I love it. I know that's what this business is, and I'm good at it, and I know it. And I relish the journey, just knowing that at some point there'll be some milestones that most people will look at as that is the journey. It's no, the journey is every day. The journey every day is navigating these things. And, I always tell people stay in the fight, stay in the You have to have enough why, you have to have enough passion to be doing what you're doing. And if you are, the moments come. You know, almost every company that I've had that had a success, there was some one magical moment where a partner or a customer or investor came out of nowhere and said, I like what you're doing, let's do something. And it became a trajectory changing moment. But you can't plan for those moments. Those moments are a result of everything you did before. You know, those moments are a result of the hard work, sweat and tears and reputation and relationships and everything else you built for the years leading up to that moment. And it might look like a simple moment, like, oh, that was the thing that made us succeed. And it's not. It's just that's a symptom of everything else you did before that.
Right. Yeah. It's easy to forget that. That is such a valuable lesson because people look at something and then they forget all the people that were involved in getting it to that point, right? And we're sort of seeing that in the studio right now as we're adding on more leadership team members, and they're getting credit for all the wonderful things they're doing. And it's like, wait, let's not forget all the people that got us to where we've gotten to this point, and all of the hard work that everyone has done to get us to this point where now we can take that next huge step, right? And so going back to that question, though, John added something here that I think is important: is how many startups fail because they don't focus on cash flow? Most, he says. The problem is a debt-based startup is they actually have to make money and not borrow more to kick the can down the road. I know you've got some strong opinions on that comment, Mark.
Yeah. There's so many different ways to look at a business model, right? Whether it be, debt, equity, et cetera. I think ultimately what matters is you can make sense of your business model, right? And I'm willing to take on this risk, or I'm willing to take on this debt, or I'm willing to sell this kind of equity. All those can be right answers. There's no right or wrong answer. You just have to make sure that you can reconcile it against where you think you're going to be in terms of, cash flow and viability of a business, right? There are certainly plenty of successes out there where people have over leveraged themselves and their only outcome was based on being bought. And that does work out sometimes. But, certainly in the studio, our model is if we're going to make risks on those kind of things, they should be building businesses that are viable. One of our core values in terms of the companies we decide to build is that it should be profitable by Series A. And that's not true in a lot of businesses. It's not even possible in a lot of businesses. For us, if we don't think that's possible, we won't do it because, I personally lived through plenty of downturns in the markets, and they're completely irrational and unpredictable sometimes. So I want to make sure that we're building businesses that no matter what happens in the market, they stand on their own two legs. And even in the worst markets, people get financed, but the ones that get financed are real viable, thriving businesses. So yeah, that's certainly our focus. And so I'd have to violently agree with John.
Yeah, thank you, John, for sharing that. And then Robert said, I missed this, not good. The Chief Nobody, love this. Will there be recording? Yes, Robert, all of our live streams are on our YouTube channel, so you can check those out there. And then I just want to put this comment up there. Thank you again for joining us, everyone. Matthew Davidson says, again, great to see you, Matthew. Great insights as always. I was wondering how you generate and create the right ideal customer profile. I've seen a lot of organizations that struggle to do this. So any pointers or rule of thumbs would be great. Thank you, Mark and Sejal.
Yeah. Great question, Matthew. Enjoyed having you comment on the last couple of sessions. So I think this is actually one we'll unpack in a future session around the Idea Lab because it's actually a big part of our focus. And I'd agree with you, Matthew. Like I think that a lot of folks that even the ones I haven't been a part of, but I see a lot of pitches in my career, right? And you'll hear people talk really about a really cool technology, or wouldn't this be really cool if someone built this product? And then you ask them, well, who's the ideal customer profile? And they're like wandering. They actually don't know. And I think that's one of the biggest warning signs. And it's one of the things that we're actually building into our own, process because we're just as capable as anybody about getting excited about an idea or a product and going, wait, we don't actually know who the customer is. And, someone said to me early in my career as a friend and mentor is like, the best businesses focus on somebody with a pain point and a checkbook attached to it. Mm. And it's a good focusing factor. Like, okay, is this something that's painful for somebody that they are willing to pay to solve? Like that, if you just do that for a living, you're probably going to build good startups. And it's really easy to get excited about, again, the technology or the whiz bang. I'm a product person, so I love to imagine something that could be, but you still have to be focused on, I can imagine how this is going to come to market and what people are paying for it, right? And we're getting better at that. I think we're, started out better than most, but it's something we're just trying to become hyper good at. Um, we personally are looking at how we bring early feedback into our ideas, research, price point testing, even early, like super early. If we're brainstorming an idea, how do we bring that to market and see how people might respond to it, even in a landing page or a concept or a post on social, and get people buying into an idea.
Mhm. Yeah, Matthew, we'll be covering this topic on some other things. The only lesson I'll add from this past year, what I've seen with regards to, customer profiles is just to make sure that we adapt a culture of adaptability, right? Markets evolve. We saw markets changing and customer preferences changing. So there have been times where you think you've got the product ready to go and then something changes. So you have to be adaptable and pivot when necessary to make sure that product stays aligned with what the market's demanding, right? Which can change. So you have to, again, be ready to go. And so, again, I have this question. I'm just going to put it up here. I don't know if we want to address this. Marnie Deshong said, can you elaborate on how you identify the wrong people to take capital from? Marnie, we talked about this during our last episode when we talked about a specific situation we're dealing with. But Mark, is there anything else you want to add on this question?
Yeah, I mean, context, we're behind that situation. We made our choice. But I also think making that choice just to update has been good for us in terms of really fantastic new partners coming to the table that really fit exactly what we're looking for. Um, I think that what I try to tell people is like, think of it as like a relationship, that like you're getting into a relationship or a marriage, because your business is your baby. It's like your life. You put a lot of your energy into this. And, I'll make a distinction just for everybody listening. Taking capital is different if someone's a passive investor. Someone's like, oh, this is really cool, and I'm rooting you on. I'm going to be an angel investor. Like, that's what's different, because it's a passive investment. They're usually supporting an idea. They're supporting you as a person. When I say the larger capital, that's like the marriage. And this is when someone's going to bring a significant amount of capital to your journey. They're usually going to get board seats. They're going to get control of certain things, approvals of certain things. And now you're in a dynamic where, something you started in your garage probably, or, in a coffee shop, and you've had complete control over every step of the way, it completely changes the dynamics moving forward. Now, if you pick the right capital, it can be a fantastic thing. They're going to bring wisdom, mentorship, relationships. They're going to accelerate your journey. But if you get the wrong ones, then it becomes dysfunctional and it can become toxic, and that can take the best ideas and destroy them. And I would just say that, if I could solve the relationship advice problem, I'd be a gazillionaire. But it's very similar to that. Like, how do you pick a partner? I think I always encourage people to go more into their gut and what they're feeling energetically and what they're feeling from the flow. Like, as a conversation flow, are you finishing my sentences? Are you able to hear me out? Am I able to hear you out? Are we solving problems faster? Are we excited about the same things? So yeah, I don't think it's easy to figure out how to pick a partner in life, but I think it's almost as serious as picking a partner long-term for your startup. So I do encourage people to lean into that energetic. And sometimes, the capital's at the table, and you can really fantasize about what that would feel like to have that capital and what you'd be able to do with your startup. But I think you have to calculate and contemplate what is the baggage that comes with capital. And if you have any energetic anchors or anything holding you back, I think you need to double click on that and really evaluate it, and be willing to walk from the wrong capital.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Marnie says, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I'll check out the previous episode. Awesome, Marnie. Thank you for bringing that question up. And so, look, Mark, we are at time, but before I let you go, I want to end on a positive note. Share with us a couple of exciting things that we're going to see coming out from the studio in 2024. I just want to give, before you do that, shout out to all of our new hires that have come on and are going to take our studio to the next. Connie Kwan, our Chief Product Officer, is already shaking things up. We've got Eyal Shavit, our Chief Technology Officer, and a new CEO CEO and one of our new codes, Jennifer Pereira. So we definitely know that we're going to see some really cool stuff happening from those three. But what else can we expect to see in 2024, Mark? A lot, I know, but
Yeah, yeah. I'm definitely going into 24 more excited than any previous year, and hopefully that's you should feel that way every year. But this feels like a breakout year for us, and a lot of things that we've done, and the seeds we've planted, and the momentum that we're going into it with, and momentum is a real thing. Sometimes you're coming off a low, and you're like, okay, we got to build momentum next year, and you just know it. You got 3 to 6 months to build momentum. I feel like we're ending the year like I almost wish the holidays weren't coming because momentum is insane. Um, so I think you'll continue to see new people. We have some really great people that have joined, and some we haven't announced yet. Some we will get across the line early in the year. Um, I think some of the folks you just talked about, you're going to start to see the impact that they're having really front and center. So that's super exciting. We got 4 companies that are leaving the nest, getting their own funding. It's a massive milestone for the studio because these are companies that are going to have runway and resources way beyond what the studio ever intended to give them ourselves, and that's a big milestone. It's the first time we've done that, and so they start to grow in value and impact. And we have a few that are starting to hit revenue really quickly and scale, and that just gets me super excited to see that we can build that. As I kind of alluded to, I fully expect to be announcing in January, or I'm sorry, in Q1. Our larger financing round being closed, and it's gonna. I think it might surprise a few folks in terms of what we're going to bring to the table. So we're super excited about announcing that because it's going to give us, the resources to keep building our vision. And we are also starting to grow internationally. We already were quite international, but we have some new opportunities to get more bold on that. And so I think our reach and our presence in terms of our brand and our network will continue to grow. So I'm excited for the year. It's gonna be a lot of exciting things, but it's been the result of a lot of hard work and sacrifices from a lot of people. So mainly I think I celebrate being able to honor the people who supported us every step of the way, and that they made a right choice. I feel like 24 will be another year that people feel like they made the right choice.
yes, yes. And I want to just give a shout out to Brian Kelly. He said, I see a parallel between what Mark is sharing about the ugly side of startups and in our lives and journeys as human. Yes, Brian, thank you for supporting us. You've been there from the beginning. Really appreciate you. And we're seeing some great comments coming in. Great advice. This has really resonated with everybody. Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing your wisdom. I look forward to picking back up in January. Thank you for everybody for joining us. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you in 2024. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Steve.
Okay, bye,
Happy
Mark.
holidays, everybody.